Military strategists have satellites. Economists have predictive models. Diplomats have decades of accumulated negotiations. And yet, every crisis that explodes in the Oriente Medio, every financial collapse, every war that restarts where another ended, takes the world by surprise. There's a document more than 2,500 years old that mapped all of this with the precision of coordinates. It is not cited at any ONU summit, but it should be. There is a word the world uses as a metaphor, a word that appears in movie titles, in newspaper headlines, in the speeches of leaders who employ it to describe anything that seems catastrophic enough. But the word has an origin that most people have never truly stopped to investigate. Har-Megiddo. In Hebrew, this literally means Mount of Megiddo. It is a real place. It has verifiable geographic coordinates. It is located in the north of Israel, on the plain of Esdraelon, approximately 150 kilometers north of Jerusalem. Archaeologists excavated that soil and found the remains of at least 26 distinct civilizations that built, destroyed, and rebuilt on that same spot throughout approximately 5,000 years of documented history. 26 layers of civilization stacked on top of one another, each replacing the previous one after a war, a conquest, a collapse. That plain is considered by military historians to be the most contested in all of human history, and the prophetic texts said, more than 2,400 years in advance, that it is exactly there that the great final confrontation will take place. This is not religious interpretation. This is verifiable geography connected to a written record of a traceable date. And this is only the beginning of what you find when you stop treating these texts as devotional literature and start treating them as what they are: historical documents with disconcerting specificity. Scale the weight of this for a moment. The Book of Apocalypse was written approximately in the year 95 after Christ, during the exile of the Apostle Jerome on the island of Patmos. The Book of Daniel was written in the 6th century before Christ, more than 2,600 years ago. The Book of Ezekiel was composed between the years 593 and 571 before Christ. These are texts that survived the fall of Babylonia, the expansion of the Imperio Romano, the Crusaders, the Reforma Protestante, 2 world wars, the nuclear age. They survived everything that tried to erase them, and what is written in them about the present time is too specific to be dismissed as coincidence. In 2023, the Índice de Paz Global recorded 32 active armed conflicts simultaneously around the world, the highest number since the end of the Segunda Guerra Mundial. 32 wars happening at the same time. In 2024, the world watched the largest missile attack against Israel since the founding of the Estado, with more than 330 drones and missiles launched by Iran in a single night. 2 high-intensity conflicts in the heart of Europa and the Oriente Medio operating in parallel, with global supply chains fragmenting, with alliances that seemed permanent unraveling in a matter of months. Analysts called this a polycrisis, a term coined by the historian Adam Tooze to describe when multiple systems collapse simultaneously, amplifying each other in ways that predictive models cannot calculate. The text of Matthew, chapter 24, verses 6 and 7, was written approximately 1,990 years ago, and it says the following: "You shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." The text does not say there will be one great war. It says there will be a pattern of simultaneous wars, conflicts that multiply, instability that becomes structural. And then it specifies, there shall be famines and earthquakes in various places. But all these are the principio das dores. The text uses the Greek word odines, which means birth pains, not the end, the beginning of a sequence that will intensify before it is resolved. The pattern is not random. This is the key that changes everything. Put into the right perspective what has happened in the last 75 years. On May 14, 1948, the Estado de Israel was officially declared. In less than 24 hours, 5 Arabes armies invaded the territory. A newborn state with a population of approximately 650,000 people against the combined forces of Egypt, Jordania, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. The historical probability of survival was close to zero. The state survived. Not only did it survive, it expanded its territory. It happened again in 1967 in the Guerra dos Seis Dias, when Israel faced a coalition of Arabes countries and in 6 days, literally 6 days, captured the Peninsula du Sinai, the Faixa de Gaza, the Cisjordania, and the Colinas de Golan. It happened again in 1973 in the Guerra do Yom Kippur, when the attack was a total surprise and Israel still survived. Now consider what the ancient text said about this people and this territory. Ezekiel chapter 36 verses 24 and 26. For I will take you from among the heathen and gather you out of all countries, and will bring you into your own land. This text was written when the Israelite people were in captivity in Babylonia more than 2,500 years ago. The text makes a specific prediction that a dispersed people would be gathered in their original territory after centuries of exile. The historical exile began in the year 70 after Christ, when the Roman general Tito destroyed Jerusalem and the Templo, dispersing the population throughout the Imperio Romano and beyond. For approximately 1,878 years, a Jewish state did not exist on the map. And then, in 1948, it existed again. The text was written while the people were in captivity in Babylonia. The fulfillment happened 2,500 years later, with a state founded exactly in the territory the text specified. The text was not wrong. Observe now what Ezekiel described in chapter 38 about what would happen after this restoration. The text speaks of a coalition of nations that would turn against Israel, Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Roz, Mesech, and Tubal, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya, Gomer, and Togarmah. These names are from the geography of the 6th century before Christ, but historians and scholars of biblical languages have identified the geographic correspondences with consistency over centuries. Magog corresponds to the territory that today is mainly occupied by Russia and parts of Asia Central. Roz is identified by various scholars as a reference to the peoples to the north, again pointing to the Russian region. Persia is Iran. The name Persia was officially replaced by Iran in 1935. Ethiopia and Libya are regions that include parts of northern Africa and the Horn of Africa. Gomer and Togarmah correspond to regions that are today part of Turkey and the Caucasus. Follow what is happening now in these same geographies. Russia and Iran signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty in January of 2025, the first treaty of its kind between the two countries in decades. Iran provided Shahed drones to Russia for use in the Ukraine conflict. Russia provided missile technology and support for the Iranian nuclear program. Turkey, a member of OTAN, has simultaneously deepened relations with Moscow, purchasing Russian S-400 missile defense systems against the explicit opposition of the Atlantic Alliance. Iran currently maintains the largest arsenal of ballistic missiles in the Oriente Medio, estimated at more than 3,000 projectiles of various ranges, with the capacity to hit any point in Israel in a matter of minutes. The Repubblica Islamica finances and arms Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and militias in Iraq and Syria, a network of proxy forces that envelops Israel in a 180-degree arc of hostility. This is the map of today, and the map of Ezekiel is 2,600 years old. There is a counter-argument that any honest investigator needs to put on the table. It could be that these correspondences are retroactive interpretations, forced after the events. But the problem with this argument is that the geographic correspondences were documented by Judaeus and Christone scholars centuries before any of the modern political realities existed. The Talmud, compiled between the 3rd and 5th centuries after Christ, already associated Magog with the northern region. João Calvino, in the 16th century, wrote about the coalition of Ezekiel 38 in terms that were not remotely fulfilled in the geopolitical reality of his time. The text was interpreted in its current direction long before the existence of a modern Russia, an Islamic Iran, or an Estado de Israel. The specificity was not retroactively applied. It was in the text. Now go to Daniel. The book of Daniel, written in the 6th century before Christ, describes a series of visions about empires that would succeed one another in the world. The 2nd chapter presents the statue of Nabucodonosor, an image of 4 distinct materials representing 4 empires in sequence: gold for Babylonia, silver for Persia, bronze for Gracia, iron for Roma. Historians confirm this sequence with precision. The Babylonico Empire was replaced by the Persa in 539 before Christ. The Persa by the Grego, with Alexander in 333, and the Grego by the Romano. The text was written during the first of these empires and described the following 3 with chronological and characterological precision that scholars of antiquity confirm to this day. But what interests us most here is in chapters 11 and 12 of Daniel. The text speaks of a final period described as the time of the end, when there will be an invasion by the Rey do Norte against the Terra Santa, and when many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. The Hebrew expression used for knowledge shall be increased, Yirbe Hada'at, describes an exponential, non-linear increase in information. It took humanity approximately 5,000 years to double accumulated knowledge for the first time. Today, it is estimated that human knowledge doubles every 12 to 13 months. In fields like artificial intelligence, the pace is even more compressed. The text of Daniel described this phenomenon more than 2,600 years ago with a precision that was not derivable from the empirical observation of his time. Scale what is on the plain of Megiddo today. The region is currently an Israeli archaeological park, Tel Megiddo, where excavations document the 26 layers of human occupation. The surrounding plain, the plain of Esdraelon, is approximately 36 kilometers long and 24 kilometers wide, one of the largest open plains in the Oriente Medio, surrounded by mountains that function as a natural amphitheater. Napoleon Bonaparte was there at the end of the 18th century and described the plain as the most natural battlefield in the entire world. The British General Edmund Allenby fought the decisive battle there that ended Ottoman control of the region in September of 1918. The place has a memory of war accumulated over millennia. And the text of Apocalypse chapter 16, verses 14 to 16, says that it is exactly there that the nations will be gathered for the battle of that great day of Deus Todopoderoso. This is not a symbolic address. It is a real address. The book of Apocalypse was written by Jerome in approximately 95 after Christ, during the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitiano. Chapter 16 describes 7 bowls of judgment upon the earth, each corresponding to a type of calamity. Sores on human beings, the sea becoming like the blood of a dead man, the rivers becoming bitter, the sun scorching men with intense fire. The text uses the Greek word kaumatizo, which means to burn with scorching heat. a temperature that causes physical damage. In 2023, the world recorded the hottest summer since scientific instruments began measuring temperature approximately 170 years ago. In 2024, this record was surpassed month after month for 18 consecutive months. The text of Apocalypse is not the only explanation for this phenomenon. But it is disconcerting that the phenomenon exists exactly within the pattern the text described. The heat is not coincidence, it is sequence. Back to Ezekiel 38 verses 4 and 5. The text describes that Deus says to Gog, "I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army." This image, hooks in the jaws, is an image of being pulled by a force beyond one's own will. The text describes a coalition that is formed not by the rational, strategic choice of the leaders involved, but by a force that drags them into a confrontation that, by conventional political logic, would be against the interests of all participants. Now consider what geopolitical analysts have been saying about the Russia-Iran alliance over the last 3 years. That it was formed out of necessity, by the pressure of sanctions, by international isolation, not by ideological affinity or long-term common interest. Russia and Iran have competing interests in the Caucasus, the Caspian, and Syria. They are not natural allies. They are allies compelled by circumstances that neither created intentionally. The text would call this hooks in the jaws. Geopolitical analysis calls it convergence, forced by external factors. These are descriptions of the same phenomenon with vocabularies 2,600 years apart. Observe what Iran says about itself. The Repubblica Islamica Iraniana was founded in 1979, following the Revolution Islamica led by Ayatollah Khomeini. Since its founding, the Iranian regime has never abandoned 3 central positions: the destruction of the Estado de Israel, the expulsion of American influence from the Oriente Medio, and the establishment of a regional Islamic order under Shiite leadership. In 46 years of existence, the regime has never strayed from these 3 positions, regardless of which internal faction was in power: reformists or conservatives, moderates or radicals. The only constant is hostility toward Israel. The Iranian nuclear program, which began secretly in the 80s and was revealed to the world in 2002, has as its explicit goal, by significant portions of the regime's leadership, the capability to destroy the Estado de Israel. In 2022, Iran accumulated uranium enriched to 60% purity, sufficient to, after further enrichment, produce at least 3 nuclear warheads. The country is weeks away from enough material for the first bomb, according to estimates from the Agencia Internacional de Energía Atómica published in 2023. 3 warheads. Weeks. Ezekiel 38 verse 8. After many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel. The text specifies a land restored from the sword, whose inhabitants were gathered from many peoples. This is the Israel of today, a nation formed by Judeans coming from more than 80 different countries, speaking dozens of languages, gathered in a territory that has passed through countless wars and conquests throughout recorded history. In 1948, it barely existed on the map. Today, it has one of the 20 largest economies in the world by gross domestic product per capita and the largest number of startups per capita on the planet outside of the Valle do Silicio. This is not a random development. It is the documented fulfillment of a pattern written more than 2,500 years ago. Now put into the equation what is happening in global economic systems. The Book of Apocalypse, chapter 13, verses 16 and 17, describes a system in which no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark. Theologians debated for centuries what this mark could be. What is happening now is technically distinct from anything that existed before. More than 130 central banks around the world are in varying stages of development or implementation of central bank digital currencies, the CBDCs. China has already launched the digital yuan in 23 cities, with more than 140 million digital wallets opened. What all these initiatives have in common is that, unlike physical money, a central bank digital currency is programmable. It can carry restrictions on how, when, and where it can be used. It can be blocked for certain categories of products. It can be conditioned on behavioral parameters. No monetary system prior to the digital era could do this. This is the first monetary system in human history technically capable of implementing on a global scale exactly what the text of Apocalypse described approximately 1,930 years ago. The text was not describing the technology of its time, it was describing something that would only become possible 2 millennia later. Consider also the role of China in this configuration. Apocalypse 16, verse 12, describes that the great river Euphrates will dry up, that the way of the rays du Orient might be prepared. The Euphrates flows through Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, exactly the geographic corridor that connects the Oriente Medio to Asia. China has invested more than $1 trillion in its Iniciativa Cinturón y Rota, building infrastructure through exactly that corridor. Ports, roads, railways, pipelines that link East Asia to the Oriente Medio. China today has the largest conventional army in the world in terms of personnel, approximately 2 million soldiers on active duty. The text of Apocalypse describes an army coming from the Oriente with 200 million warriors, a number considered literally impossible by all commentators before the 20th century. Today, only China and India have populations large enough to mobilize forces of that magnitude. 2,000 years of technical impossibility resolved in one generation. Observe what Matthew 24, verse 14 says, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." This verse was written when communication depended on messengers on horseback and sailing ships. The idea that a message could reach all nations simultaneously was technically inconceivable. Today, more than 5,300,000,000 people have access to the internet. Content in more than 700 languages circulates on platforms that reach every country on the planet in real time. For the first time in 2,000 years of history, the technical condition for the fulfillment of this verse is fully satisfied. The infrastructure is ready. Return to the human cost of what is unfolding, because all this prophetic architecture does not exist in a vacuum. It exists within real lives, displaced families, generations growing up with the sound of sirens as the soundtrack of their childhood. In 2023, the number of forcibly displaced people in the world exceeded 110 million for the first time in recorded history. 110 million human beings without a home, without a country, without an immediate future. In 2022, the Programa Mundial de Alimentos das Nações Unidas declared that more than 345 million people in 82 countries faced acute food insecurity, the highest number since the organization began tracking this data. Abundance and scarcity coexisting on the same planet at the same time. The prophetic narrative is not abstract. It is incarnated in real bodies, in real decisions. These are 18-year-olds in Israel who woke up on October 7, 2023 to an attack that killed 1,250 people in a few hours, the largest massacre of Judaeus since the Holocausto. These are young people in Gaza who grew up under blockade and bombardment without ever having left that territory of 365 square kilometers. None of them chose to be born in the center of a fracture that is 4,000 years old, 4,000 years of accumulated fracture. The fracture has a specific origin. Genesis, chapter 16, describes a decision made by Abraham and Sarah approximately 4,000 years ago. Sarah was sterile. The divine promise of offspring seemed impossible to fulfill within the available physical circumstances. Sarah, following the custom of the time, documented in Mesopotamian marriage contracts from the second millennium before Christ, offered her Egyptian servant Hagar as a concubine so that Abraham could have a biological heir. Hagar conceived. Ishmael was born. But later the promised miracle happened. Sarah, at 90 years old, conceived, and Isaac was born. The tension between the two women and the two sons within the same house became unsustainable. Hagar and Ishmael were expelled into the desert. The text says that Deus appeared to Hagar in the desert, promised that Ishmael would be the father of a great nation, but also said of him, "He will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." This is not a curse. It is a diagnosis, a description of the relational pattern that would settle in. And Ishmael is considered the ancestor of the Arabes peoples, including those who today inhabit the territories in conflict with Israel. The two sons of Abraham, two heirs of the same promise, divided by a human decision that seemed reasonable within their circumstances. Sarah was not a villain. She was a desperate woman who tried to solve a real problem with the resources available in her time. Abraham was not irresponsible. He was a man trying to honor a commitment to a wife who was suffering. The intentions were understandable. The consequences were incalculable. 4,000 years of consequences derived from a decision that made sense the day it was made. Observe what Ezekiel 38 verses 18 to 22 describes when this coalition finally invades Israel. "And it shall come to pass at the same time when Gog shall come against the land of Israel, saith the Señor Deus, that my fury shall come up in my face. For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel." D. The text describes a direct intervention in the conflict, confusion among the troops, a torrential rain, hailstones, fire, and brimstone. This language has been interpreted by some as a description of extreme weather conditions, by others as a theological metaphor, and by still others as a description of modern weaponry in the language of the 6th century before Christ. Whatever the interpretation, the central point remains. The text describes that the coalition that invades Israel will be destroyed in Israeli territory, not in a conventional long-term conflict. The result is written. The path there is still underway. The world continues to call what is happening geopolitical instability. It continues to seek solutions in summits, agreements, sanctions, and negotiations that lead nowhere. The Oriente Medio has remained at the center of every major global crisis for 75 consecutive years, and no modern analysis can satisfactorily explain why that specific region, that specific territory, continues to be the axis around which the world turns. The texts of Ezekiel, of Daniel, of Apocalypse do not call this instability. They call it positioning. Every nation that moves, every alliance that forms, every conflict that escalates is described in these records as part of a sequence that has a documented beginning, middle, and end. And the end, according to these texts, is not the definitive collapse of civilization. It is the resolution of a dispute that began long before any nation existing today was founded. The map was written. The coordinates are in the text. The question is not whether it will happen. The question is how many people will understand what they are seeing when it does.